It's 10:30 now, so good morning and welcome to the first session of the High School Climate Change Symposium. You're in the policy strand right now, and this session is being recorded. So our speaker for this session is Professor Denise Keele from Western Michigan University. She is a environmentalist, I believe. So yeah, thank you for coming, Dr. Keele, and sharing your knowledge with us. So now the floor is yours. I will be answering questions at the end of the session. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A, or you can use the chat if you just have something you want to talk about immediately. But yeah, so floor is yours now.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much to all the students organizing this and Trey Shea for hosting this session. I was very impressed with your welcome message and the things that you're already doing and hosting the symposium. I was at the Hastings Symposium 1 year ago, which was actually the last in-person public event that I got to go to. On the ride home from Hastings last year, we were discussing whether we were going to need to cancel our next day's classes. And then of course, here we are in the virtual world. So you're just doing an awesome job. I'm so glad to be part of this again, and hopefully we'll have a little fun. Throw questions in the chat and I'll try to answer as many as possible at the end, and hopefully save some time for discussion. But I do want to share just a few things with y'all this morning. It sounds like you're pretty well educated already. Again, I'm at Western. I do a lot of things there. I teach environmental policy and politics and environmental law and classes on sustainable development. I chair our climate change working group. So just like you have your group at your school, I was trying to make a change. That's what we do. We just started a new climate action plan committee at Western Michigan University. And I also chair the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition, which is a county-wide organization that brings together about 25 different local faith, youth, environment, businesses, trying to drive city and local level change as well. So you can check us out. I managed to put the Instagram handle on there because I bet y'all don't use Facebook anymore. But you can find out what we're doing at WMU Climate or at Kalamazoo Crisis. And we hope to build those bridges and connect. And if any time that we can help you move something forward, or you need a speaker on any topic, we are there for you. What I want to do today is hopefully pretty briefly introduce you to the underlying political attitudes and value bases. I know a lot of the other speakers today, given the list that is available, are going to be able to talk about some specific policies. And one thing though that we don't often talk a lot about are, what do Americans just believe, and why is that important? And why don't we have climate policy, right? What are some of the challenges? And although we know most of the technical solutions, there are still some pretty big political challenges to getting these things passed. And so I'm really going to focus my talk on trying to answer these questions about what we think, why maybe we think that, and how we can utilize public opinion in order to support climate change policies that we might want. I draw a lot from the site here, and I'll actually show you it in a minute. There's a great group at Yale that's focused on climate change communication. And so they have a ton of different surveys and publications. If you're not familiar with the Yale Climate Change Communications Program, check it out. I'll show you one cool thing from them today, but a lot of my talk is drawn from their work over the last 10 years or so. So I think you all know this term. I always, still start my talks with the idea that we are living in an entirely new epoch, folks, right? The Math and Science Center is hosting this, so you understand that, right, until now, we have the Earth's functions have been primarily shaped by geologic forces, right? What the Anthropocene means is that now we, humans, are the wildfire. We are the most dramatic force shaping and changing our Earth right now. And of course, this is the temperature grid that's from 1850 to 2018. And we are in a very urgent situation. I think, again, most of you know that. This is a worldwide statistic, but if you think about your household budget, or if you think about how you're going to spend your allowances, if you get such things, We are on track to emit 8,100 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalents, okay? And we only make, folks, we only have a budget of 2,900 gigatons. So this is like you have bought the mansion and you cannot afford it, right? We are already on track to emit 3 times the budget that would keep us in the policy goals of 2 degrees, much less 1.5. The really bad news is that we've already spent 73% of that budget. $2,100 is already gone, and I only have $2,900 to spend. We have to live within this budget. So the urgency from the science, of course, could not be greater. So what I really want to focus on is, what do folks think about this, in particularly American? And first, I need to kind of share with you, why is this important, right? So many of you may be familiar with the idea that we already have a lot of environmental laws. How did we get those environmental laws? From the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, endangered species and toxic substance control in the 1970s? We mostly got that because of a huge public social movement. That is what created the first Earth Day in 1970. It's no coincidence, actually, that the first pictures from the moon that show the Earth as one, that came back in 1969, galvanized the idea that we have one planet. We must solve our pollution commons issues. And it is really a social movement that brings together this and puts it on the political agenda. You're probably familiar with folks like Rachel Carson and her book in 1962, and pollution getting on the agenda. I think we're in one of those moments again today, which is why I'm focusing my talk on the idea that public attitudes, opinions, if you make them what's called salient, making politicians listen to them, can and have changed the entire policy landscape. And I see all of you as an opportunity to do that. So just a little bit of the sort of research from political psychology. What kinds of attitudes and opinions and sort of conversations do we want to have? And in policy, what we really need to be thinking about is, how are we framing a particular solution? And there are sort of 4 big guidelines that I'm going to share with you, and we can evaluate them as we go through. The first one is actually the human brain privileges experience over analysis. Not that we don't need the analysis that you're going to create about how cost effective a particular technology is, or the science that we need to be able to make better solar panels. But folks need to have an experience, right? Someone right before this was asking me about, well, what does Texas mean? It means that those folks are experiencing right now extreme weather that they will be able to link in their personal experience to climate change, right? Framing in that way is really important. The second one, and you all probably are pretty familiar with this, you're in high school, right? We are social beings. We care what other people think. We actually follow more than we lead, and there are social norms that are really important. The third one, kind of back to that Texas example, is it's gotta be something that I can emphasize that is happening to me. If I don't think that I'm gonna be affected in your policy framing, then folks are much less likely to support any sort of action. And so we really have to do what psychologists call reducing the distance, right? Making those impacts known. And then finally, we should be framing this as what we can win. What kinds of solutions about solving climate change? What kind of things would you love about that particular future? No one likes to lose. And so much of climate change is about what we have to give up or what's gone wrong. There are a lot of things we can talk about a future that looks very, very bright for all of us as well. So I want to show you a couple of these attitudes, and this is the Yale, oh, there's your schedule, you know about that. This is from the Yale program on climate change, and it's just a really great site to start to look at. So let's think about, what do folks actually think? And so the first screen here is showing us the percent of adults who think global warming is happening. We are at an all-time high of 72%, folks. This has gone up from just barely 50% in the early 2000s. And so when we look at this map, one thing to notice is the scale over here. So the more red that a map gets means the higher the percentage of Americans believe, or when polled, say something is true, right? So when I go through different questions, the redder the map is, that's a good thing in this particular scenario. And I did want to point out, if you use this resource later, you can actually look by county, you can look by your congressional district, and of course the state. So we're technically in Calhoun County right now. Let's see if I could, oh, there it is. Calhoun County is just under the national average at 67%. In Calhoun County, where the Battle Creek Math and Science Center thinks that global warming is happening. Okay, that's great, right? This is the hugest percentage we've had in a long time. And you'll see they've got a host of other things here. What about if I say global warming is caused mostly by human activities? I think we might predict, do you predict the map is going to be more red or less red? Think about that as I click on this. Global warming, uh-oh. So I think it's happening. Do I think it's caused by humans? Much less, down to 57% nationwide, folks. What about, do I actually think that most scientists agree, that the scientists know that it's happening? What does the American public think about that? Again, the more red, the better. The more blue, the worse, the lower the public opinion. So let's click on scientists. Uh-oh, now we're down to 55%. So even the all-time highs, 72% of America is like, yeah, global warming is happening. Only 57% think it's caused by us. That's a huge policy problem, okay? If we don't have the problem identification right, we're never gonna get to solutions. And even less believe the scientific consensus. Of course, there's been a huge denialist movement that has funded that. What about just some of our general beliefs, right? Are you worried about global warming? Let's go back to that one. Oh, okay, all right. Lots of folks are actually worried about it though. Who will it harm? Again, think about this idea of framing policy solutions, making sure that I'm making those impacts known, right? So one of the things we want to know is, what do folks think about, I might be worried about it, but who do I think it's actually going to harm? So how about it's going to harm people in the US? Yeah, okay, like we're pretty good. We're at 61% national average. Folks think it's going to harm somebody in the US. But remember, my policy lesson is I need to make that a direct link, and I need you to think that it's going to harm you personally before you really get involved in that movement. So let's look at that question. Global warming will harm me personally. Again, think in your head, do you think that it's going to get more red and have more public support? Or do you think that this is going to be a blue map and have less public support for the idea that I'm going to be harmed personally? Let's take a look. Pretty much no one in the US thinks that they are going to be harmed personally. Only 43%. I know, you all know this is wrong, right? So here is, I'm an optimist. Here's an opportunity, right? In our framing and our messaging, what we then need to do is make this link. We're not currently making the right links between the impacts that we know are happening. Texas is a great example of that right now with the extreme weather event and the overall belief in climate change, right? So we've got a ton of work to do here. I want to show you one other one, because global warming is affecting the weather. And because one of my items and what I heard in your opening speech from the students this morning is we need to be like talking about this more. Is global warming affecting the weather? Actually, a lot of folks do understand that concept. So if you need a place to start a conversation, I always say the oldest small talk in the world is about the weather. And you can always start there. I'm from a very conservative background, from a farm family in Iowa, yet I can talk to my family about why we've had 3 50-year floods, right, in the last 5 years. That's the kind of extreme weather. But let's look at whether we are actually talking about it. Yale also asks the question about, do you discuss global warming at least occasionally? Again, think in your mind, if you think this map is going to turn super red, And yeah, everybody's talking about it, or if you think it's going to turn super blue. Are you talking about it? Well, let's see. Pretty much no one, folks. And this is why we need these symposiums, why we need the education that you're getting, and why you are all here today. You can now be what we call policy entrepreneurs. And with your knowledge, you got to get out there and at least start talking about it. So no one is talking about this issue. And that is just the easiest thing that we can be doing. So what we call this, what I just showed you, is something that we call then the attitude behavior gap, right? We've got a record high of Americans saying global warming is happening. 2 in 3 would say, I am worried about this. Yet fewer than half see anyone doing anything about it. They don't think it's going to harm them personally. That's for somebody else or some future generation, or maybe somebody in another country. Only 36% are even talking about it. And even fewer than that, only 15% are actively participating in any campaign to focus our policy solutions on that. Again, we can take those lessons of framing things that are meaningful to folks' lives and those social norms and just start talking about this. We need to fix this attitude behavior gap. One thing that Yale does that's nice is to break out the audience segments. And so there's not really, there are 6 different global warmings when they look at the different national answers to those questions. And I'm showing you their results sort of over time. So the first box is from the first time they did this study in 2013, and then 2018. And the most recent results are from April of 2020. And what they've discovered when they poll nationally is that there's actually 6 global warming Americas. And those range from the highest belief in global warming, the alarmed and concerned, those are the most concerned, most motivated, to the doubtful and dismissive, those with the lowest belief in global warming, least concerned, and least motivated. And what they have really done is try to pair those psychological insights with communication strategies, right? So you're here at this symposium today, you're probably alarmed and concerned and are answering all those questions, yes, yes, yes. You are an audience that needs to know what to do, right? And so I'm gonna tell you something that you can do. The cautious group is really interesting to me as a political scientist, because if I wanted to shape more public opinion and make sure I had more public support for policies, that's the group of I would love to have another 25 to 20% of people move from cautious to alarmed and concerned and really get motivated to take action. The cautious group is the most likely to depend on social cues, meaning these are your friends who are waiting to see you ride your bike, to see you translate to veganism, to see you switch out to solar panels. They want to know that is the social norm, that is the cool thing to do. That's what the cautious folks are waiting for. And so if enough of us are talking about it and enough of us are taking personal and collective action, then we can move that group. The doubtful and dismissive are actually, right, a whole other category. We'll talk a little bit more about them. It's very difficult to sometimes engage in that conversation, right? But know that there are different strategies. And by asking folks the questions that I just showed you from Yale, you can usually put someone in one of these categories, and then you have some different ways to approach them. So why don't people talk to elected officials, and why aren't we making our voices heard? And so this study, don't worry too much about the 3 columns. What it's doing was a study based on trying to figure out the differences between the Latinx population and white America, but we kind of all share the same fears, basically, about talking to our own legislators, our own elected officials. Most of you are going to be able to vote at least in the next election, and politicians do care about that. But there are some barriers. And so one of the things that I'm going to talk about is how you can join the group, be part of the school, that organization, ask your teachers, right, to help overcome these barriers. This is the kind of work that I do with students all the time at Western Michigan University. We learn how to, well, if no one's ever asked you to contact an elected official, you can get over that one right now because I'm asking you. Okay, that's the number one barrier. Number two, it wouldn't make any difference. It does. I'm a political scientist. I can tell you it does make a difference to contact your elected officials. I wouldn't know who to contact. Again, groups and people like me can help you figure that out. I wouldn't know what to say. Again, use your network. Rely on experts and groups that are already doing this. And trust me, there are plenty out there that will help you get over these barriers. I understand that public speaking and talking to a legislator is a scary thing. And that's why people aren't doing it. And that's why education is so important, and why becoming part of that social movement is so important, so that you can get over those fears and you can learn how to say and whom to contact. These are all these are all obstacles that we can surmount pretty easily in my mind. And again, you have seen a huge social movement. We are in right now an era of social movement around climate change, and not just climate change, right? And linking these issues with social movements around identity and Black Lives Matter, with social movements around the economic crisis. There are so many different groups to join right now. The bottom left is our own groups here in Kalamazoo at a climate strike that we held a year ago, based on, of course, many of you recognize the young lady in the picture on the bottom right, Greta Thunberg, who has been leading a Fridays for Future campaign. There are folks like you who are alarmed and concerned, who want to take action. And when you work together to make your message known, you can overcome all those barriers in order to change the political system. Let's look at some actual policies. So I'm going to go back to my Yale map, and there we had ended on the dismal figure of how many of us are actually talking about global warming. So I'll go back and remind us how many folks say that they are worried about this, so that global warming is happening and they are worried. Well, let's look at who they think should be doing something, and let's look at what types of policies the American public actually supports. So there's a whole section here. I hope you'll come play with the site later, and you can find this out for your county and then figure out your elected officials and what might work best in your own neck of the woods. So let's look, here are some of the different policies. They've asked a whole bunch of questions of the American public. So let's look at, does the American public actually think that the president should do more to address global warming? Yeah, okay, 60%. We probably need some national action, right? Again, the more red this map is, means the higher the percentage, and you can read that percentage at the top. The more blue means the less the folks believe that. Should Congress be doing something to address global warming? A little bit less of folks. And what about my state? What about Governor Whitmer? Should she be doing something? No, most folks actually do support some level of federal policy because they recognize the transboundary issues of carbon pollution. What about some specific policies? And hearing your talk this morning and knowing what your own teachers have done in order to incorporate education in your schools, there's actually a question here, let me find it, for should we teach students, where did it go? Schools should teach about global warming. I wonder, what is your prediction? Is the map going to go red? Huge support for that, or is it going to go blue? Schools should teach about global warming. Whoa, there's huge support for educational policies. That's why I hope that we're seeing some of the change that we're seeing in your education, in the education that I can provide at Western Michigan University as well. What might be some other policies that already have support, or which ones might we have to do some work on? That school should teach global warming. Let's look at, how about just funding renewable energy sources? We know that that's a technical solution that's out there. And again, watch how red or blue the map becomes. Fund research into renewable energy sources. Oh my goodness, almost everyone says, 86% of Americans say that is a policy that we should be enacting. Folks, in my world of politics, you rarely see anything over 70%. When you see a number like 86%, that should tell you you got a lot of political cover in order to do that. How about things like regulating carbon dioxide? That would be a policy, a prescriptive policy we could put in. You get a lot less support once you get into more regulation. How about if we were to do something that that Michigan actually does and require utilities, so consumers energy or a DTE, to produce a certain amount of electricity from renewable sources? Anytime you get into require and words like prescriptive, it gets a little bit less public support. Another bill that's been out there for a while, how about what if we were to tax fossil fuel industries? What's the public support for something like that? Oh, my map, a little bit more blue. There's a lot of support out there for carbon tax. What about if myself and Dr. Durango want to buy that energy efficient vehicle or solar panel? We want to get a tax rebate for that. People support that if the money goes back to you. Whoa, now you're talking about, again, if my whole premise and argument to you is that social movements and public opinion drive what politicians will do. Contrary to popular belief, politicians are not the leaders. They are followers of what you expect and demand. And with numbers like this is showing us which policies we could easily get a lot of support for. I hope you've had some fun with that particular site, and we'll go back and use it. So let me try to break this down just a little bit, and I will save some time for us to have a discussion at the end as well. So how do we reconcile this idea, though, is what you're probably asking yourself. Okay, that's great, Denise. You've showed us a ton of public support for different ideas and for different policies, and maybe you've already get my drift here about social movements and organizing and talking about it. What's the political problem? What are the remaining hurdles then? If we've got such huge public support for some of these policies, why don't we actually have policy? And so I do want to just take a minute and share with you the kind of big picture of what some of the political challenges, why we don't currently have a lot of these, especially at the federal level. And there's sort of, my belief here is that a lot of this is what's called collective action. And I don't worry too much about the deniers and folks who don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. And in fact, I'm related to many of them still, right? But my whole argument to you is we have to galvanize the folks like you who already do understand this issue. So the big problem with with passing any of these climate policies is politics is often, unfortunately, a little bit about the blame game. And carbon pollution, much like though air and water in the 1970s, is what we call a commons or collective action problem. And I know that Professor Durango is a former economist, so he understands this. The whole problem here is, why would I act and clean up something if somebody else still has a license to pollute and they're not going to be doing their part? You've all done group assignments before, all right? You've all had, there's one student who's doing all the work and someone else is free writing, and you all get the same group grade, right? So what's my incentive to do more work if someone else isn't going to? It's actually a really difficult political problem. And so between trying to figure out who's responsible, like oil and gas companies and what their share should be versus, just a regular person like myself, we all have something that we can do, but it's getting that agreement on, why should I if I don't see others acting? If we were to put this back in our policy guidelines, this is social norm 101. But just know that's a real issue, right? People are waiting. They don't want to be the ones to take the action that costs them money or time today, and have you not also be willing to act. No one wants to lose, right? The other challenge, and if you haven't noticed it, we're living in pretty partisan times. And so, I showed you the Yale stuff first because it's nice to see that there are 6 global warming Americas, but you're probably all at least familiar with the 2-party system in the US, and probably have some idea of this being a very ideologically diverse Very, very divisive time. And we can actually show that in political science over time. This is from the Pew Center that asks questions to place yourself on the political scale from consistently liberal to consistently conservative, which in the US politics translates into Democrat and Republican. And what you should be seeing on this over time, so that's 1994, 2004, 2014, so every 10 years. And then after the 2016 election, a lot of scholars said, hey, Pew, let's not wait 10 years. Could you do your study again? Because we think it's gotten even worse as far as partisanship is concerned. And they did. And the answer is yes. And so one of the reasons I show you this is we do have to worry in a two-party system about how divided we are. And what you should be seeing is those medians of Democrat, Republican beliefs moving farther and farther apart. As a political scientist, where does policy get made? It gets made in that little middle box. It's supposed to be this purple color. That space has been diminishing as we have gone more and more extreme on each side, actually, especially on issues of environment and climate. So this is a huge challenge if we're going to pass any of those policies, even though we've got this huge public support and we need to galvanize that, and y'all need to say, this is an issue I'm gonna vote on, right? That's one of the only things that can overcome this type of extreme partisanship. But it explains a lot about why we don't have current policy. Again, this is a partisan, unfortunately, in my view, issue. We know that that belief in climate change is at all-time high. It's been growing dramatically over time, but that increased concern is divided between the parties, with Democrats, those that are more consistently liberal, supporting climate policies, and the most conservative Republicans absolutely not. What I'm going to submit to you is that, well, here's some good news. I know this graph is a little bit hard to read, but why I really like coming to high schools and why I love teaching college students is that the demographics on this are absolutely changing. And so bear with me, I'll walk you through this graph. So this is, again, from our folks at Yale. And what they said was, I think that the question was basically, is there a difference in those beliefs about global warming by age? And there is. And so here are the top questions, or what you're looking at on the left. Global warming is happening. Global warming is human caused. Most scientists agree, and I'm worried. And what the scale is, you can see on the right over here, all of our Democrats, right? If you identify as a Democrat or even moderately liberal, yeah, 70+% of the population is absolutely supporting those policies and beliefs if you're in the Democratic camp. What's interesting over here is our Republican colleagues. Millennials, Gen X, boomers, silent. We haven't even started polling Gen Z yet, your generation, right? Millennial conservatives, Republicans who self-identify, right, in the millennial age group, their belief in global warming is at 56% versus their older colleagues. Global warming is human caused. When you look at that by age and party, 42% of conservative millennials would agree with that statement versus only 19% of the silent generation. The same thing. Do scientists agree? Conservative youth get this. Conservative youth are worried about global warming, not as much as their liberal youth colleagues, but much more than the within party comparison. This gives me great hope because that means education and social norms and talking about it are working, because the younger conservatives are absolutely going to change the Republican Party's stance on this issue. There will be no way in a few years when the Republican Party will be able to get away with not sharing the youth base. So just thinking about sort of why this setup occurs, why we have this party division, we can really link the idea of Yale's 6 global warming Americas with our two-party system. And what this is showing, again, I'm just reminding you at the top, the 6 global warming Americas, right? Most folks are actually in the alarmed and concerned. I'd really like to move those cautious social norm people. What does it look like in the doubtful and dismissive? Why do they believe this, right? So the other political challenge and what explains a lot of the policy divide in that partisanship is really about value bases, about how we perceive solutions. And so if you're following along with me, the graph on the bottom right is showing those same 6 global warming Americas. And what Yale did here was ask which value base those folks most identified with. And egalitarianism is in the blue, and that's most highly associated with the Democratic Party. These are the folks who believe that, government regulation could and should be involved in solving these problems, distribution of wealth, there should be equal opportunity, versus the sort of individualistic view that is driving much of the conservative ideology and the Republican Party. And the individual view is to have technology as our biggest solution, to rely on the free market, that government is the problem, and that we need to have more economic solutions. And so what I'm going to submit to you today is there are actually solutions that could fit in that little purple middle policy space. And on that list of questions that I showed you, that we could probably get both value bases to agree to if we were to follow our framing policy guidelines. But do know, right, why do we not have policy? Because there's a huge partisan split on this issue, and it has much more to do with the values about the solutions to climate change than it does about the science and about whether we believe in it or not, right? Folks want to see solutions that match their values. So I'll give you an example here, right? If you are a egalitarianism in the moderate to liberal category, you support what's called command and control. And so when we were looking at those graphs, when we saw policies like the prescriptive mandates or requiring certain emission standards, those are policies that are going to be more likely to be supported by folks who find themselves on some end of the liberal democratic continuum. When we looked at policies like funding renewable energy or providing that tax rebate to you, a market mechanism, anything that helps with the pricing of carbon, that's where you're going to get conservative and Republican support. And that's why you saw the maps go so red when we looked at things that said invest in education or funding or tax rebates, because that's about individual choice. That means that Denise gets to choose whether or not I put those solar panels on my house. And there's just a little graph there at the bottom showing you we have actually done this in environmental politics before. And we have a cap and trade program for acid rain, for nitrous and sulfur oxides. And we've had that program since a Republican president, George Herbert Walker Bush, put that into effect. That has absolutely been a policy success. So there are ways to merge climate solutions that could match the diverse 6 Americas and the diverse 2-party value bases. And that's what I would hope that we could work on a lot more. To give you a kind of further example, so why something like, you're probably familiar with the Sunrise Movement, why did this get so much backlash from conservative side of the aisle? Because it's seen as big government, right? Now, the Sunrise Movement is absolutely an incredible organization that if that is be a great way for you to get involved and to get that kind of training that I was talking about. They are making their issue salient, right? They hold politicians accountable. And it's the first time we ever thought about making the intersectionality argument that energy, economics, health, climate all go together. But it got backlash from conservatives because they saw it as prescriptive. They saw it as too command and control, too much government in our lives. And so you saw the immediate negative reaction to that kind of bill. On the other hand, something else that was in the last Congress that I fully expect to see being promoted in this new Congress that just got seated is a bill proposed by Citizens Climate Lobby. Again, another great organization that will give you all the training to talk to elected officials and really learn how to be effective communicators and do it right. Their bill is a market mechanism. It is one of these rebates. And so what it would say is, although it taxes fossil fuels at the end of pipe, so think about the pipe that comes into the gas station or the natural gas that flows into consumers' energy, there'd be a fee on that. But it's about what happens to the money is why you get conservative support for this particular policy. The money doesn't go back to the federal government. Instead, the money goes back to each of us individually as a dividend for me to make my own individual choice about whether I want to just pay higher utility bills or whether I want to use that money to put solar panels on my house and get off the grid. For example, British Columbia does this policy, and a family of 4 gets about $120 back a month to either offset higher bills or to make their own changes. I see Barry Rabe is on your schedule later. Go to his carbon pricing talk. He is the expert on this. I just wanted to present it as different policy tools, get different public and party support. And that's something you really have to think about when we're thinking about which policies are going to be able to pass. So just a quick little review of where we're at, and what I might see coming down the pike here with this new administration. We've got you're learning the 3 branches of government, of course: Congress, the executive, and the Supreme Court. Don't forget that underneath the president is where all those executive agencies live, our Environmental Protection Agency and the Park Service. All the different agencies are going to be implementing these rules. So the president has a lot of power. You've seen some of those executive orders in your lifetime and sort of seen how this works. But they're also a little bit vulnerable. We would really like to have some congressional action that could be more durable and long lasting. Right? When presidents come in, we call it the seesaw effect, right? So Obama came in, for example, and tried to do a lot of executive orders around climate change. Trump rescinded all of those orders and put us back another 10 years. And now Biden comes in and we've got a whole bunch of executive orders trying to move us forward. If Congress were to act, it would be a much more durable institutional situation. It'd be harder to take to court and harder to overturn with just every election. So what has Biden sort of done? I'm going to just quickly go through some of the fun things here. I know a lot of your other speakers are going to talk about specific policies today. Of course, we have a couple of new positions in the Biden administration, a presidential envoy. We've rejoined the Paris Agreement. We've canceled pipeline permits. And the Biden slogan is "Build Back Better." I will tell you, this is actually a lot like the Green New Deal. But we can't say Green New Deal because that term got so politicized in the last 2 Congresses because of the conservative backlash to big government. You'll really see the focus on jobs, right? What is Biden's plan doing? It is trying to also speak to those conservatives and say, we're going to prioritize the economics of clean energy and environmental protection, that this no longer has to be a trade-off and that we can actually do both. The Biden plan, again, just super quickly, would get us to 100% net zero by no later than 2050. Some of you might think that's still too late. A lot of groups out there like Extinction Rebellion are calling for no later than 2030. But look at these words. These words are meant to have a bipartisan effect and approach. Resiliency, standing up for our economics of the situation, but a lot of also inclusion there of the climate justice piece. He is really making this about jobs, and most political scholars think that's so we can get conservatives on board with the solutions and stop arguing about whether climate change is a problem and instead spend our time on what we should be darn doing about it. You know that there are 2 Americas, right? And so really what we're facing right now, and we're not sure how it's going to play out, with a 51% majority in the House and Senate by the Democrats, which now are more likely to support these, especially government policies. You've kind of got 2 choices. Are you going to take a winner takes all and go with your 51% majority and try to pass everything you can? Or should we try to look at some of those conservative value bases and see what kind of bipartisan packages we can make? We are at that. We're having that conversation right now. I'm just glad we're finally having it. You should know that in the House and in the Senate, there are a bipartisan climate solutions caucus in both the House and Senate that includes a lot of members that are trying to work together on what those solutions could be. So I do think that there are some bipartisan solutions that are going to come out of these. Indeed, the House of Representatives now has a select committee on the climate crisis. And here are their principles. Number 1, grow our economy. Guess who's they're trying to speak to there, right? A free market, individual, conservative value base, trying to bring folks together here to really solve this through clean energy jobs. And then it's protecting health, land and waters, and then it's environmental justice, right? So the liberal side of the aisle is not going to give up on the idea that this also has to include justice for everyone. And this indeed means folks like farmers and coal miners, okay, right? Not leaving them out in the cold. And so I just, I know the meme's a little old now. I gave this talk a couple weeks ago, right? But when you see folks like the US Chamber of Commerce and Bernie Sanders agreeing on potential solutions, that's probably a winning idea, my friends. And with that, I'll just sort of try to close what I see coming down the pipe here. We've got this disconnect again between citizen preferences. There's a lot of public support, even though there's that attitude behavior gap. We're not seeing those policies translated into action. I'm optimistic because of those huge public opinion that I showed you at the beginning, and particularly with young conservatives being at all-time highs on climate and environment issues. But I'm also concerned because of that partisanship, and we really have a choice to make about whether we're going to try to include different value bases, or we're going to use that slim Democratic majority to pass congressional action. I'd much rather see Congress pass a bill than continue to rely on executive orders that the next president could just take away. But at the same time, I'm glad to see Biden doing what he's doing, right? Right now, we're just relying on all those laws we passed in the 1970s. That again, how did we get those laws? Because of public opinion and because of strong social movements, mostly by youth, who said, we are not going to stand for this anymore, and we're only going to elect and support people who are going to work on climate. So what can you do? And this is where I hope to spend our last 10 minutes or so together talking. Keep learning, right? Get involved, find your school group, find one of these groups that I've talked to you about. Sunrise, Citizens Climate Lobby are both huge in Michigan. They're different ends of the political spectrum, if you will. So no matter where you or your family falls on that ideological continuum, there are folks in your camp working on this. Mostly, I would just say, talk about climate change. That statistic about the attitude behavior gap, about believing and what you're doing, that is really troublesome. Especially, let's learn together how to talk to elected officials. And if you want, sometimes what we do in the last of my sessions is we practice and remembering those different psychological insights, why you care about climate change, how it will affect you or your family personally, right? Reduce that psychological distance, how you could set the social norm. And what's most sometimes useful is to think about how the future will be better if we were to address the climate change. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if there are any questions, or if any of that made any sense to folks, and what they might want to talk about. I think we've got, maybe a little less than 10 minutes. Sorry, I was hoping to save at least 10. Anybody want me to go back over something? Do you have a question? Do you want to try talking? Why do you care about climate change? Anybody want to answer that?
I can start, I guess. Relating to the part about, talking to elected officials, today in your What's Next document that you get after the symposium, we have a kind of like a template and like a way to contact your representative, your state representative, so you can have them take action on climate change. So look forward to that. I guess I can start by why I care about climate change, if that's the question.
Yeah.
I care about climate change because I've noticed that in my lifetime it's been getting a lot more like worse, and I've been noticing the effects that it's been having. So that's why I care.
Yeah. And so help me with the next, because people really do like the idea of like something good, right? And that if we were to address climate change through policy, that it's not just going to, I'm never going to be able to eat hamburgers or fly again. And maybe that's true. What would be something, I'll push you, Tracy, what would be something that you would love about a future that addressed the impacts that you care about? What would be that world look like? What would be something positive that you would love about that future?
Well, I don't know. I haven't really thought about that before. I mean, I guess like the weather just being better, because
Okay,
I know
that's
one day in like November it was like 75 degrees here, and I was like, that's not normal for
yeah.
November in Michigan. But yeah.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So usually if you can think about why you care about these severe impacts, and then, well, what I love about that future, well, gosh, the animals might be able to continue their own cycles that they're used to. And perhaps we could reduce the suffering of the folks who are living in Texas right now. That might be something I would love. I would love for less people to be affected by extreme weather that causes them that harm, right? Um, what are other folks thinking? Anyone want to help, want to try it out? Why do you care? And can you turn that care into something that you would love about a future if we were to enact any of those policies? What would be better? Build back better is the slogan, right? What would be better?
You guys can like put in the chat, or you raise your hand, I can like allow you to talk. So you're unmuted and you don't have to type it. But
Yeah, I can't see anybody's questions, so y'all gotta help me.
Yeah, there are no questions right now.
No questions.
Yes.
And no one wants to try it out. You're all afraid. See, this is what's wrong. Only 36% of people want to ever talk about it. You're in the safest space you could ever be with folks who care and have knowledge. Now is your time to practice. Put in the chat.
So I'll add to something that I would love is I read The Uninhabitable Earth.
Yeah.
Right. And this may sound silly, but one of the things that made a big impact on me in that book, it's a tiny thing. It's that the changing colors of leaves in the fall would go away. And I know that that is a minor effect compared to all of the displacement and land loss and starvation and human suffering, but that it did. It just, and I would love to still have a change in color in the fall of the leaves. It's such a beautiful thing. It's such a simple thing. Yeah.
That's perfect, Kelly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And students, you might, a common one I get is when I can tease out of you what something you might love might be. Might you not love to have one of those clean energy jobs? Might you not love to be working on the technical solutions? Might you not love to be a state representative yourself and be given folks like me that tax rebate to change over the economy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is a future that is possible. And thinking about it that way really does, I think, otherwise it's a lot of despair, right? And again, and that's why sometimes people don't want to talk about it, and that's why they don't want to talk about politics, because we're not giving them enough reason. Like, no, it could be great, right? And that's what I see the Biden administration, this current Congress, finally starting to do. So I'm a little hopeful.
So we have in the chat, somebody said that they think the air quality overall and the beauty of nature would last longer and maintain its growth. And that's really nice too. Yeah.
Yeah, boy, that sounds like something I could get bipartisan support for. The original conservation movement is actually from conservatives. Conservatives, huge support for national parks, for those kinds of ideas, right? People do care. It's sometimes just about how we present it. And I know, right, I don't mean that you should pander or that you should compromise for no reason, but we can often communicate more effectively and build bigger and diverse coalitions to get that future that we all actually want. We could get rid of the two-party system. Now I see stuff. I would totally, there are some, you want to come to college with me, whoever said that. There are a lot of institutional responses like filibusters and two-party systems and money and politics and all of these other things, right? That's why y'all need to run for state rep. I would love a future where students who had this kind of climate knowledge become elected representatives.
Yep. So
Yeah.
with that, it's 11:24 now.
Okay.
So